Who are we waiting for?
All.
Okay.
Some, yes.
Okay. Gentlemen, we ready? You guys ready?
Yeah, we got the fire. Just got it in.
I call the May 26, 2020 City Council Committee, the whole meeting to order. Clerk will call the roll.
Arevalo?
Here.
By telephone. Brereton?
Here.
By telephone. Frank?
Here.
Present. Freeman?
Here.
By telephone. McGee?
Here.
By telephone. Porter?
Here.
By telephone. Ratcliffe?
Here.
By telephone. Snow?
Dan?
Snow?
Wasn't he on before?
I didn't hear him before.
Okay.
Not present. He was? I don't have a dot next.
We'll wait till he comes back on. He'll announce.
Stevens?
Here.
Present. 7 present.
Okay. First thing I wanted to do tonight was kind of give the council an update on where we are with COVID-19. It has been extremely confusing for everyone the last 10 days, as the governor has been issuing one order after another, the legislature, the JCAR taking away his punitive orders, ordering out another whole set of conditions and moving us further ahead so everybody's in phase 3 by the 29th, and then issuing guidelines which seem to be fairly well thought out for most businesses and industries. Amazingly lacking there is there's no guidance for churches. There is no guidance for state fairs and county fairs. And he was asked very directly last Thursday during his press conference about the fairs, and he sidestepped the issue. So we're in the process of trying to figure out whether or not we can have our fair. The guidance from IDPH is you can't have gatherings of that size until phase 5. So we're looking at what is true guidance that we have to abide by and so forth, because the fair folks have got to make a decision soon because of the financial obligations they have to vendors and acts and all that kind of thing. And a lot of vendors and acts are also talking about they're not going to come to things. So that's a challenge. As far as the job the health department has done in Boone County, it's been phenomenal to be able to contain the cases in 3 basic areas, and any death is one too many in my book. What happened at Symphony has been a tragedy, but I just got off the phone with the health department, with Amanda, before I came to the meeting, and she said that their reaction from their corporate folks was amazing, that absent that reaction in applying all of the assets that they did, that the death toll out there could have been 4 or 5 times what it is. And so the health department is very pleased with their cooperation and what they've been doing. From jump, this whole thing got bungled at every level of government. And now they've passed it down from the federal government to the state governments, and then from the state governments to us, because they don't want to make decisions about things anymore, or there are confusing decisions made at different levels and nobody knows what to do. So what we have tried to do here in Belvedere is very quietly work with our businesses about businesses that could be open, who could see their clients one at a time privately, observing social distancing and parameters of cleanliness, and they've been operating in that way. We decided when the new rulings came out concerning food and beverage that we really needed to ask the council for some additional things. And we will get into that in a little bit. But at this point, in this juncture, we know that Chrysler is going to open the first of the month. They have been doing a lot of changing around of where things are out at the plant. We know when they open, they're not going to be at full job force or even probably half. The car industry nationwide and worldwide is flat, so there's not a lot of demand for vehicles at this point in time. I get a day-by-day report because my grandson works for security people out there now, and it's very interesting about they all have to sign in and get their temperature taken, the ones that are coming in to work on moving things around. So the bottom line is this thing is not over, and the number of cases in Illinois and the number of cases countrywide and worldwide keep increasing. We're inching toward 100,000 casualties in the United States. And, you know, I hear some people say, well, X number of people get killed from the flu, and X number of people die in traffic accidents, and X number of people die. You know, one death from this thing is one too many. And until they get a vaccine, until they are able to better treat it, we're going to continue to have it wax and wane. So what we've tried to do is find a common ground between the health people who are on the front lines of this thing and what we can do to try to help our businesses get back in business a little bit. And so that's where we are tonight. Before we get to that, we have under item A from the Belvedere Fire Department, a discussion on the station number 1 upstairs remodel. Chief, you want to take off with that?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. The Belvedere Fire Department, station number 1 upstairs remodeling is at the flooring stage. The 1960s tile is mismatched, it's broken, and some are missing. The department had the tile tested for asbestos, and the end result was that it was positive. It's recommended that the tile be removed. 3 contractors have submitted bids ranging from $5,500 to $12,500 to remove the tile. All 3 contractors are doing the same work. However, the bid for $5,500 is utilizing government stimulus funding to keep his employees working and is therefore able to provide us with a sizable discount. Unfortunately, the offer is only good for a limited time and is up until June 1st. So I'm asking the council to waive a second vote and accept this bid from Ironwood. Copies of the 3 quotes were attached in your to this memo. The expense will come out of the building repair maintenance line number 152206010.
So, Attorney Drella, we'll really want to have a motion and a second from the committee vote, and then a motion and a second to waive. How do you want to do this?
What are you waiving?
If I could.
The
The second vote.
What second vote?
The council wants to waive the layover to council.
You can't waive that
Okay.
legally. The committee can lay it as a committee, not as a council. So, it's not, unless you're passing an ordinance, there is no second reading. So it would be complete at the next council meeting that it appears on.
Okay. So, we need a motion to approve this work as presented. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Alderman Stevens, who is present. May I have a 2nd?
I'll second that.
Who is this? Motion, second by
Daniel Alderman Arroyo.
Questions, comments, or further discussion concerning the motion now on the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Yes.
Are we going to be able to move fast enough for this gentleman to make his first, June 1st on this, or or when is our? Yeah.
So,
The meeting is June 1st.
So that his bid would be, we don't know what his bid would be yet.
close with the other 2 contractors.
Okay. So let's do this. We've got a motion and a second. You're going to have to come back with other bids anyway. So talk to him and tell him what the situation is, and the first we could approve it is next Monday night, June 1st, and see if that is consonant with his ability to maintain that bid. And if it is, come back with that bid, and if it isn't, we'll start over. Well, yeah, but he has 2 other bids, and we're approving this one, which is significantly lower. Yes?
Are we for sure getting the government stimulus if we vote for this? It's,
The court is already at 5,500, yeah.
yeah,
So,
but are
yes.
we promised that if we,
Yeah.
okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yep.
So are we good?
All we can do is ask.
Did we have any nay votes? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Sounds unanimous, I guess. Okay, under number 3, Finance and Personnel, unfinished business, there is none. Under number 4, Finance and Personnel, new business. Under A is the revised budget, financial year 2020, which is last year. And Alderman Drella or Becky will explain exactly what that means.
So what you have before you, every single year, when we've completed our fiscal year, we go through and do a revised budget, which includes your actual revenues and your actual expenditures for that year. This is the ordinance that the auditors use as they complete the audit. So the reason it was important for us to get it on here tonight is that it'll need to go to council for a first reading and then a second reading on June 15th, and then the auditors are back out here by the end of June. So we will need to have this in place before they can complete the audit. I was going to just kind of go through, if you turn to page 7. At the bottom, you will see what the total general fund revenues and expenses were for the fiscal year. I'm actually really pleased with it. Despite everything that happened, I think COVID really didn't affect fiscal year 20 that much, just because of how it fell. You'll notice that we had $266,108 more in revenue than projected, and we were over $422,000 less of expenditures than we had budgeted. So with a balance to be placed back into the general fund reserves of $718,456. So I was really pleased with that, and I think our department heads did a good job of staying within their means and staying within their budgets. If I'll answer any questions if anybody has any.
Any person?
I have a question.
Alderman Freeman?
So Becky, the fiscal year 20, that means that's the budget that we are living off of as of May 1st of right now this year, correct?
No, this was last year, so this was May 1 of 2019 through April 30th of 2020.
Okay, so this is all said and done. This is all in the past.
Correct, that's what it basically is. Yeah, that's why these are your actual revenues. These are expenses that you've approved every single month for the last 12 months. This is just something that we have to do, an ordinance that we have to do for the auditors.
The revised budget ordinance that's before you is simply a restatement of everything we did in the past year. It has nothing to do with what's going forward. And it's simply adjust our books to reflect exactly what the city council expended in the previous year and reflect exactly all income we received in the previous fiscal year. And the auditors use that document to prepare their audit that they present to you usually in mid to late summer.
Additional questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll invite a motion to approve the revised budget as presented.
I'll make the motion to approve the budget
Motion from Alderman
revising.
Stevens. May I have a second? Second by Alderman Frank. Questions, comments, or further discussion concerning the motion now on the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? The revised budget for year 2020 is approved unanimously. Next up, at the behest of Alderman Freeman, she wanted to have a discussion of potential rules relating to an alderman abandonment or malfeasance while in elective office. I believe there was an additional handout from the city attorney, and he will make a presentation of that fact sheet.
And very briefly, Mr. Mayor, and I apologize to the council, I was not able to get this done in time to make it to your packets. I did email to each of your city email accounts earlier today. My guess is most of you did not receive it, given the late hours. So I will basically iterate what the memo details. But in essence, as the mayor stated, Alderman Freeman had asked to discuss actions that the city could take to adequately address cases where an alderman becomes disqualified from office during their term of office. For example, moving out of their ward, or there are other ways to become disqualified as well, or refuses to attend meetings. And as you know, I've previously rendered the opinion that Section 3.1-10-50 of the Illinois Municipal Code determines when a vacancy occurs and the manner in which the corporate authorities can declare a seat vacant. Alderman Brereton raised the question previously whether or not we couldn't change that with our home rule authority, and my opinion and that of most other most other municipal attorneys is that you cannot, because Article 7, Section 6F of the 1970 Constitution only establishes the manner in which you can change your form of government. Previous cases held changing the terms or how you remove or add an aldermanic seat pertain to the form of government. So the only way you can do that is through the referendum process. So by simple home rule ordinance, we could not change that. There are some things that the council could do. I am not particularly optimistic about their effectiveness, but one example could be simply requiring each alderman to annually certify the location of their primary or permanent residence. I would recommend, if you're going to go that route, perhaps tied into the filing of the ethics statement that you're all required to do to the county every year. Have you simply file a statement with the city clerk identifying where your permanent residence is located. A second option, which I think is perhaps problematic in some extent, but you could do it, would to establish a fine or other penalty for an alderman who knowingly continues to serve in office in violation of state statute. The problem is the enforcement side of that. If an alderman were to remove themselves from their ward and move out of state, the council finds out about it, declares the seat vacant pursuant to Section 3.1-1050 of the municipal code, they're gone. So we go get a judgment in circuit court against them for the fine, but they're gone. Getting service upon them with the sums and things like that could be problematic unless we know where they're at. So these are steps that the council could take. I was trying to think outside the box to some extent, but some of you may have ideas as well.
Alderman Freeman, did you have some ideas that you wanted to share?
Well, I just, I was actually going to ask for, a violation of the residency requirement potentially occurred. I just wanted to bring it to light, the situation, because it's not okay. And I was going to ask the city attorney, for advice and direction on how this can be prevented in the future, and what, if any, penalties we can establish either within our code or within our official oath to deter this or other violations of requirements of office for the future. It's unfortunate that Alderman Crawford served our city for many years and is now resigning, has resigned under like a disgraceful cloud of suspicion. When I moved from 1528 to 1532, which is exactly the house next door, I did not leave my ward, I did not leave the city. I went down and updated my address with Julie Stapler, because I took an oath as an alderman to support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Illinois, and faithfully discharge the duties of the office of alderman according to the best of my abilities. So there's, right and wrong, and I don't want to be, I want the citizens to know that if wrongdoing occurs, that it will be addressed at the highest level so that this isn't going to happen again. We've had multiple things, I think, over the years that never did get addressed and have always just kind of been swept away. And I think that there should be either something in our oath or something in our code of ethics or something that if you fail to meet the requirements of being an alderman, and continue to do so, you are penalized, either, monetarily or removed or whatever the case may be.
With respect to the oath of office, that's actually set forth and required by state statute. I've never looked at our ability to change that with home rule authority. I could look into it, but that really doesn't create any kind of a penalty phase like you're talking about. Excuse me, like you're talking about. With respect to the method of removal, as I stated, Section 3.11050 specifically gives the city council the authority to remove another alderman if, in fact, they determine that they have vacated their jurisdictional ward or what have you, and to declare the seat vacant. Obviously, the problem becomes, in order to do that, the council needs to know that the alderman has left the ward. And as you know, I've mentioned in the past, the statute requires you to maintain your permanent residence within your ward, but the case law is all over the place on what it means. Because actually what the statute says, it says you cannot permanently remove yourself from the ward. A temporary removal doesn't count. For example, repairs to the house, you move out of the ward for 5 or 6 months while the repairs are done. Under this case law, that would not be removal from the ward. In situations, for example, when you're called up to active duty or to serve for a period of time in the armed forces, that does not count as removal from the ward. If you're sent away for a period of time for work, that may not constitute removal from the ward, and I'd have to look at the case law specifically, but the Ron Emanuel case is the best example of that one. So it does create situations where each case has to be looked at specifically. Obviously, in cases where an alderman moves out of state permanently, it's an obvious one. But again, to avail itself of its rights under the municipal code, the council needs to be aware that that has happened.
Alderman Frank?
Attorney Drella, is there any way that we can recoup the money that we paid him for 5 weeks?
No.
Well, right now it's an honor system. We knew his house was up for sale. I would have thought better that he would have told us.
The same section, it's all in 3.11050, which I think I provide copies to the council before. That section specifically provides, I don't have it in front of me, I probably should have printed it, provides that the alderman holds that seat until such time as the council declares it vacant. And because or he resigns, and because those two things didn't happen until he resigned, technically he was still an alderman of the city, and we cannot remove his pay. The only other way that they can be removed is through a circuit court action, which did not happen either.
Well, this is the mayor. I agree with Marcia that we've had a couple of instances of this in the last couple of years where an alderman just didn't come to meetings. And I don't know where George was, to be honest. Once we started to do the call-ins, I never thought about it. I mean, we have a meeting every week, and I don't go check and see where everybody's living every week. I don't know where everybody is. And so the reality is, as was the case with the alderman who didn't attend, we started to go through the process to remove him from office. And at the 11th hour, the meeting where the vote would have been taken to remove him from office, he resigned. And so everything prior to that was kosher, which I don't agree with. I have come to this council in the 7 years that I have been mayor and ask for looking at punitive financial things to do when people didn't come to meetings. In other words, you get so many excused absences, and past that point, we dock your pay. The council, to a man, voted it down both times that I brought it to the council. So that's, I understand that. But at the same time, you know, there are laws that are set out with a process and a procedure. And if we want to add something to our oath of office as a local ordinance or something like that, we can have the attorney look into doing that. We have to be careful with those kinds of things, that they don't violate state statute, and that. Being home rule doesn't give us a whole lot of leeway in a lot of things, but we can look into making some changes.
And Mr. Mayor, in case one of the aldermen has the right idea, the concept of docking the pay would be illegal. You cannot dock an alderman's pay. Because under the municipal code again, and again, I don't think can be changed by a home rule, but I'd have to look that up. But current statute, once their salary is set, it may not be diminished during their term of office. So because we're paying our aldermen on a salary basis, we cannot diminish their salary during their term of office. Obviously, if the council wished to in the future, they could move to a per meeting pay basis, as the county used to do, I believe still does. But to go to that avenue, you'd have to pass an ordinance that would only apply to prospective future terms of office, and you have to do that at least, I believe, 180 days before the election.
Before the next election.
So that is always an option that has been presented to the council in years past, and it has always failed.
Yes, Alderman Frank.
I remember when we had this problem with the previous alderman, and we did the speed memos. I remember filling mine out. Mine was 2 pages long. Did we get any other ones from people? Because that would have been preventative for George.
Over time, I got 3 speed memos total. And I saved them. I have them in a file somewhere. So.
Well, I think maybe what we
I
do.
have a question.
Okay. Is maybe with Attorney Drella to do the ethics, like with Julie Stapler, is that once a year we would do that?
That would be up for the council to decide. I mean, I guess that'd be my recommendation. The problem is if somebody moved early in the year, you wouldn't know about for a while, but at some point, you know, how often is too often? I mean, you could do it every 6 months if you wanted to, quarterly, annually. That would be a local ordinance.
Yes, Alderman Freeman, you had a question?
Yeah, so I don't think that if George had moved and we were not doing this COVID-19 teleconferencing, he would have just not been attending the meetings, because I didn't think he was going to, you know, fly home from Arizona every week if that's where he was living. So my concern is that had we not been doing this, his seat would have just been empty, absent, and he would not have been able to cast a vote. So is there some way, and I don't know that we will ever have to teleconference again or not ever have to teleconference again, but is there something we can add to, you know, a resolution or a statute that says if an alderman is found to be in gross violation of the requirements, that any vote that they cast can be recalled, rescinded?
Two answers to that one. I don't want to shoot from the hip. My gut reaction is what you're talking about, no, but I'd want to do a little bit more legal reaction or research on that. But also keep in mind that a council, for example, if it were to adopt an ordinance, I'll use this as an example, if it were to adopt an ordinance to require certification of your residency annually, in 6 months, an alderman at committee could actually be put on an agenda and bring a motion to rescind or repeal that ordinance. There's a few cases where that becomes problematic. Obviously, you're not going to repeal the budget ordinance because then you have no budget. It becomes difficult in cases where there has been a motion to reconsider, and then I'd have to do the research on that one because our current local code provides that once a motion has been passed and reconsidered, it should not be reconsidered again. Although my opinion would be that if it went back to committee and started all over again, that would probably be lawful, because obviously councils all the time take up the same issue from time to time to time. And you've all seen us do that here before. But it has all had to go back to committee from square one to do that. So I guess what I'm saying is, most votes that this council takes, it can undo at a later date by simply putting on a committee agenda and going forward with that. Motions in relation to expenditures of money, that's difficult to do, because if the money's already spent, it's kind of hard to unwind that bell. But ordinances, things like that, you can always reconsider those.
Additional questions or comments in this discussion? Hearing none, we'll move on. The next thing, under item C, we had a discussion last week, and we want the council's approval to prorate video gaming fees for new establishments. And we are already going to do that for existing establishments. We're not going to ask them to pay the full fee when they're not in business. That's not a fair thing to do. So I entertain a motion for proration of video gaming fees for new establishments.
I'll make that motion.
Motion by Alderman Stevens. May I have a second? May I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, and
Alderman Rolo.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman Revelo. Questions, comments, or further discussion concerning the motion now on the floor?
And Mr. Mayor, this, I believe, was initiated by Alderman Snow initially, or he brought up the concept. Currently, your local code provides that when a new establishment applies for video gaming permits, which these are the per machine permits, it's a $500 permit fee per machine, and it's an annual fee. They're required to make that initial fee upon application for the permit. So if they apply in November, they have to repay that $500 for each machine. I believe it's June 1 is the pay date. So we're only talking about that first year. Your current code provides for absolutely no proration of that fee. This would be a permanent change, as I understand it, to the city code to require the city clerk to prorate the fees for whatever's left in that remaining year from the time of application. And that would have to come back to you in ordinance form.
So, any additional questions or comments? All those.
I have a question.
Alderman Freeman, please proceed.
So, Attorney Drella, so can we do it so that it pertains only while, COVID-19 is going on, and it's just a temporary prorated thing that because all these businesses have lost money throughout this pandemic?
In answer to your question, I'm going to make it twofold. Legally, yeah, you could. Practically, you wouldn't want to, and this is why. Number one, we're talking about new establishments, ones that have never had a permit before. They haven't lost any money yet, and that would be placing all of your existing establishments at a disadvantage to these one-year new entities. Number two, as the governor's starting to open more things up, I don't think you're going to see much more time frame left within which there'd be a new application coming in. I know we haven't had any calls on one in several months now. I believe there's only one outstanding. There's no available location permits anyway, so we couldn't issue any new ones at this point.
So these are paid like on a rolling basis. It's not like everybody pays in January. It's like if you open your establishment in November, then your year goes from November to November, right?
No, that's incorrect. It's no different than our liquor license fees currently. They pay an initial fee when they apply for the license and it's approved, And then in June 1, they pay their $500 renewal fee per machine. So if they have 4 machines, and they want to open up on December 1st, when those are approved in late November, they'd hand the clerk a check for $2,000. Then on the next June 1, they'd have to give us another $2,000. That is the current mechanism, and it's been in place since we started video gaming.
Okay.
Any additional questions or comments concerning the motion now on the floor? Yes, sir.
Do you think it's fair that you charge somebody $2,000 and they run from November or December to June, and you charge them another $2,000?
Mr. Mayor, I understand he wants to speak, but we might want to make a microphone available to them because they can be heard on TV and to the alderman as well.
So I'm not speaking. You want me to yell at it or what? It's pretty simple.
That's what
I
this
think-
ordinance is about, is to keep that from happening. This
Right.
is a proration.
That's right, and the one that's on the phone doesn't understand that totally. She's thinking it's a one time from December to December, and that's not right. And it should be prorated, as should be the prorating that's happening now because of COVID-19, which I'm hoping you will.
We're already gonna prorate.
The
That's the only thing I got to say.
Okay,
The existing owners have already been prorated.
so we've already addressed that, and this is gonna keep that from, excuse me?
Comes up next week.
That is June 1st.
That comes up on June 1st.
So, all those in favor?
But then our money is due on June 1st. So do I pay or don't I pay?
I'm not collecting those right now. I told you, and we'll send you a letter.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Excuse me.
Alderman Freeman, please proceed.
So I'm not sure who was addressing me, there in the audience, but, I believe I was called the woman on the phone who didn't understand, which is why I asked the question. It was clarified for me, so I fully understand.
Well, good, we've taken care of that. All those in favor of approval of the ordinance now, or the motion now on the floor, signify by saying aye.
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 Is anyone,
Aye.
that sounds unanimous approval, okay. Moving on, thank you. Okay, after we saw the governor's relaxed rules, we realized something, that after we finally got Sidewalk Cafe ordinance approved in the last month or so, that again would create a situation that was actually in violation of the governor's rule, which we could do under a local authority, but it wouldn't be fair to the businesses in town. So, Russ and I had a conversation some months ago about, after Stroll had ended, about wouldn't it be neat to, since we're closing everything down, to put picnic tables outside so people could go out and socially distance and still. So the governor's provided us with an avenue to do that. So I'm asking the council to give us the authority for a temporary closing of Buchanan Street to traffic, to place picnic tables down the middle of the street so that people can social distance, not just for Buchanan Street, but if they want to go to someplace else and get some food and come sit down there. Also, I'm asking for a relaxation of the strict rules of the sidewalk cafes, because they're not fair to our pure bar establishments, so that they can put a picnic table out there and we can get everybody back in business to some degree. If people own their own property, like Coach's Corner, and they want to put a tent out on their parking lot and put picnic tables out there, fine. I advise Ned's out there, even though they're in the county, I said, get yourself a big tent, like your neighbor next door at the Smoking Coop, and put some picnic tables out there. It's time that we try to get as many businesses back to earning a living as we possibly can. So I'm asking for the authority to make those changes. I'll entertain a motion to that effect.
I make that motion.
Motion by
I'll make that
Alderman
motion.
Frank. May I have a second? Second by
I'll
Alderman
second
Stevens.
that.
Questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Alderman Porter?
Oh, go ahead.
Alderman Porter, please proceed.
Yes, I would just have one question for Chief Heiser on that one. If we blocked it off, the picnic tables and such, is that going to be a problem if we have a fire down in that area? We're getting the trucks in and that type of thing. Would that be any type of an issue?
No, not in that short block right there. Our hoses are definitely long enough to have far reach. So that would be not a problem, Alderman.
What about medical and like an ambulance?
Again, it's 1 block long, and we're able to take a gurney down and we'll pick up patients there and then come back to to State or to Whitney.
Okay, thanks.
Additional questions or comments concerning the motion on the floor? Yes, Attorney Drella.
Keeps trying to give me a promotion.
You're sitting in an alderman's chair, so feel honored.
2 questions, Mr. Mayor. Number 1, I'll make a couple comments on your comments. Then number 2, you kind of skipped over public comment earlier, and we do have a public comment, but it's related to this item. So if you don't mind, I'll read that into the record in a moment.
Okay, please do. I was not aware that we had one.
So first, the public comment. This is from Jennifer Jardine. In the event that I am unable to attend the meeting regarding the closing of Buchanan Street to traffic to allow for expanded seating capacity for the businesses on and surrounding Buchanan Street, I would like to express my support. The City of Belvedere and its businesses have put a great deal of effort into making the Belvedere downtown a destination through the success of the Buchanan Street strolls. I feel if we fail to open this area up to keep this momentum moving forward, it will be detrimental to our efforts. We need to put aside personal, individual gains and view this as a community. Yes, we will all need to make some concessions, but in order to bring the patrons back downtown, this is critical. All businesses will benefit from the foot traffic that each business's following procures. I apologize. I really thought I'd read this better. The community and the businesses are both anxious to get back to a norm in a safe manner. With respect to the requested relief from the ordinance, Your Honor, number 1, the Sidewalk Cafe ordinance, which we recently amended to include the provision of alcohol sales in certain cases. Number 1, it carries a $75 fee for an annual Sidewalk Cafe permit that applies to all sidewalk cafes, not just ones providing alcohol. So the first question I would have is the intent to not charge that $75 fee for this fiscal year?
The mayor's intent is to waive the fee for all.
The second question I would have is that the Sidewalk Cafe ordinance as written only allows the sale of alcohol, number 1, if it's applied for with the original application, and number 2, if at least 50% of the gross profits from the organizations from the sale of food, as opposed to the sale of other revenue-generating sources. And third, that food must be sold along with alcohol for alcohol to be sold at the Sidewalk Cafe. Would it be the intent to grant relief from those requirements as well?
It would. Here's the bottom line to this. We're going to expect people to socially distance and to wear masks. And we will enforce that. You know, we can't have what happened in Lake Geneva over the weekend happen here, where we're going to end up with a second wave of sickness. They had 10,000 people in the streets. Most of them were from Illinois, and they lost control of the town completely. And so we can't afford to subject the town to the potential of having another wave of this in the fall, because if we do and we have to shut down again, we're done. So I would impress all of the owners of establishments to impress on your help, to impress on your customers, that we're bending over backwards here to try to help everybody out, but we need some help from all of you. And I think everybody's willing to go there to see how this goes. We'll take it a week at a time and see how it goes. I may have to come back to the council and say, this is not working and we need to go back to something. So, yes, Alderman Frank.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, but I'm wondering, how do you eat and drink with a mask on?
You have to have a mask when you're out in public. If you're sitting there with your group, your pod, your posse, your crew at that table, take your mask off.
Mr. Mayor, a couple other questions I have, because I have to draft this as some form of an ordinance.
Okay.
The next item I have is, there's been a lot of talk about Buchanan Street, but there are several establishments in the city that may not be in as close proximity as Buchanan Street. For example, the Gomez Restaurant at State, and I believe it's Lincoln, El Mocajete. You've got some other restaurants that may not have their own land on which to put tables. Is it the intent to relax our sidewalk cafe ordinances, which currently require maintaining, I believe it's 4 feet of sidewalk space for egress and things like that, and make it easier for people to comply with our code?
It is.
To put in, obviously we have to make sure that some of the sidewalk remains open for people to walk by.
And the idea is, at some point in the future, when we're past all of this, hopefully, we will go back to the way it was, and people will expect to pay fees, and people will expect to invest in the stuff to make the sidewalk cafe atmosphere very nice for the city. But we'll also learn from this experience and look at how we may be able to broaden what we initially did with the sidewalk ordinance. It took 4 years to get the sidewalk cafe ordinance passed. And we saw in one Sunday afternoon, last fall, stroll, 1,000 people on a day that it rained until 10 o'clock in the morning, come downtown Belvedere, behave themselves, and everybody's cash register went cha-ching, and we found out that that was something that the people in this community want. The other thing I thought, and I'll be around to talk to the businesses, particularly the business on Buchanan Street, we have some food trucks, and I'm willing to make space in our parking lot for the food trucks to park, and we could invite some of them, like we did for Stroll, on a rotating basis to come to town. I just want everybody to make as much money as they possibly can, to be able to continue growing their businesses in the city of Belvedere. So I'm asking that we kind of set aside the rules for right now, under the caveat that if it doesn't work, we will address that. You may be aware that initially the state police were charged with the enforcement of violations of the governor's order. The state police said, we can't do it, we don't have enough people. The sheriff's departments, the sheriff's association refuses to enforce any of the rules of the governor's caveats unless they are extremely dangerous to the public. Our police, so now it's our police guys that have to do this. And in discussions with our department, our goal is simply, if we have people acting out, acting up, acting goofy, we will talk to them and ask them to please behave. Because hauling them down to the jail, unless they've committed a felony, they're out on their own recognizance bond in, an hour. So we're asking the citizens of the city of Belvedere and the business owners of the city of Belvedere to work together on the same team to try to put money back in the pockets of the people who are in business here.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, but 2 last questions.
Go ahead.
Number 1, and you started to allude to this is a temporary relaxation of the rules. Is the intent to make it for the remainder of the Sidewalk Cafe season, which I believe expires at the end of October or early November, or is the intent to only make it for the duration of the governor's executive orders?
I do not want to set this in stone for 2 reasons. Number 1, if we have a resurgence of cases of COVID-19, I want to have the ability to bring that back to you folks and talk to you about it and see if we need to pull back a little bit. So can we put in there that we will review this based on the health of the community? Is that a
Well, that would be a permanent change to your code then, until you actually repeal the ordinance or reinsert the original one.
Okay, what would be your recommendation to achieve the same effect without repealing the ordinance?
It would simply be adopt a new ordinance with a temporary modifications to it to have essentially a sunset on a date certain, at which time the original
So
code
how do we-
requirements will go back in
How do we figure
place.
out what that sunset is?
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
You're asking me to figure it out?
Or the council.
Okay, council, thoughts?
Like you said, till October, November.
We could do it for the duration of this
Yeah, then
Sidewalk Cafe season.
If it takes off again next year, we'll do the same thing.
Okay, if you want to do it that way, we'll say October, but I will tell you that if we start to have a resurgence of the disease, and Amanda at the health department tells me we got to pull this thing back, I'll come back to you and we'll have to change it, okay? Is that fair enough?
Yes.
Is that fair enough to the business community?
Well, that would be no different than currently. Currently, they could have applied for sidewalk cafes. We were not granting them because of COVID, but if we had already done that and they shut down the businesses, they'd shut down the businesses by executive order. The last question I had, and this is more for the council, given the late season, the fact that June 1 is almost upon us, we could put, if the committee has its druthers, a motion to waive the 2-week layover requirement for an ordinance on next council meeting so that we could approve it in final format next Monday night.
Motion to approve?
I'd make that motion, yes.
Second? Comments or additional questions?
You've got
I
two.
have a motion and a second. Yes, ma'am, you have a comment?
Yes, I was just curious on, when you say blocking off Buchanan Street, are you putting gates up? I mean, what's keeping a customer from walking down Whitney Boulevard with that drink?
Your help.
What's going to happen with my
Your,
customers?
your employees are going to keep them from walking down Whitney with a drink. Your staff are going to keep people from walking away with drinks.
Okay, but then who's going to be held liable for it if my customers are in my beer garden, which, you know, I have the advantage per se, and somebody else on the block, customer walks away with a drink, who are they going to hold liable for that drink?
Whoever served them the drink.
But is customer going to say it was, you know, Jack Rose, if it was a short line, or if it was, you know.
So what's your suggestion? Do you have a suggestion?
I don't know, this is just a question
Okay.
to ask, who's held liable for that in that case where, you know, I have my employees on the inside of the building making sure that the drinks are walking out onto the sidewalks and the streets. But I don't want to, you know, because somebody says, oh, well, I got it from Buchanan Street, I'm going to be held liable when my customers aren't even drinking on the sidewalks and the streets.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, maybe I was confused about what the original intent was, but the sidewalk cafe ordinance generally requires you to have the space right in front of your establishment that is roped off or somehow fenced off, a fairly small section, and that's where alcohol is served. I know you talked about having tables out on Buchanan Street where people could sit and eat if they got food, but that would not be actually part of a sidewalk cafe. Were you intending to allow alcohol consumption in that area as well?
Yes.
Okay.
To meet the governor's relaxation.
Glad I asked that, because I wouldn't have written it that way.
And the point of that is, there's no way we can require everybody to have fenced off, gated off stuff. It'd take them 2 months to get there. And so, people have to be responsible for their own clientele, and that's what that is. And it's just the same thing if we pull somebody over for a DUI and they say they were overserved at a certain bar, we're gonna go talk to that bar. And that's, I mean, it's the only way we have to do it. And, yes, sir.
Yes. Russell Caldwell, for everybody in the video chat. I think the nuts and bolts of this will have to be worked out in the next couple of days. This is going to be something new. In our particular instance, we are going to try and keep our tables in front of our establishment. We will put signs on the tables stating that they're provided by a short line and firebox. I'm assuming that my customers are going to use them. If another restaurant wants to have an area on Buchanan to have tables for their clients to use, or somebody else, that's fine. If we're going to use this as a restaurant area, that becomes my dining room, so obviously those are the customers that I'm waiting on and bringing food out to and taking care of the tables. If that is the intent, then I think it's just everybody who is going to have tables out there need to take responsibility for their particular area. There is a few, again, logistical things that I would take up with this if it passes and when it's done. Refuse, are we going to have more cans? I mean, there's just some logistical things that we want to discuss. Beyond that, it's just something that everybody's going to have to get used to, especially if we're talking about leaving Buchanan Street closed for the next 5 months. It is something that will become a standard in the town by then.
Think stroll, okay? The city will provide additional trash cans and so forth. as far as there are guidelines, and there are in each subcategory, and we are printing those now from and that it contains signs, models of signs you can use, and guidelines, specific guidelines for restaurants and for bars. We are accessing that when I came here for the meeting, and we'll be printing those up or giving you the link to look at those. It's divided up into categories for the third leg of this coronavirus starting the 29th. So it says bars and restaurants. There's a whole guideline of everything that you're expected to do.
Oh, yeah, I have no issue, I have no issue with the sanitation then, but I would just assume that everybody who's got it in front of their establishment, they're going to be responsible
For their, yeah,
their area.
right.
And I don't know about the roping off part, we might
We're
have something, but in general, everybody will, I'm sure, have appropriate signage to indicate the area that is appropriate for them as they go forward. Then we just need to discuss a little bit on hours of operation of what we're going to do. Are we leaving these things out 24/7? Are we going to have some hours that you're open at your stores? Again, a few logistical things that we can work out over the next couple of days between now and the 29th, and we'll be done.
Open at your stores. I don't know what you mean.
Current code for Sidewalk Cafe is 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily.
Okay.
And you are required to remove any structures, tables, equipment, things like that at the end of the business day.
Okay, that's fine, if that's what it's going to be.
And what I said was, we're not going to hold everybody to the standard of a sidewalk cafe, which is an outline of an expenditure of some magnitude to fence off. If everybody would do that, that would be great. The idea of the picnic tables down the middle of the street was to seat more people.
Oh, I got
Now,
that.
Sandy, you have a beautiful area for people to sit in your beer garden, and you have the vestibule area for your people to sit. And if you want to put picnic tables out there or mark off, or you all want to figure out whose picnic table is whose, but there are other bars in town that are not on the Buchanan Street area that need to have an opportunity to earn some money too.
Oh, I have no issue
okay.
with that. Anybody who wants to bring a table down can do that. But then obviously, if El Boca Gente or Coach's Corner don't care, if they want to bring a table down to Buchanan Street, or 5 or 6, then they need to staff it, and they need to then be responsible for the cleanliness according to the governor's statutes, just like we would be for ours.
Okay, I hadn't anticipated that people were going to drag tables from 2 and 3 blocks away down to Buchanan Street. That would not be the intention of that.
I would expect the tables that we bring out to be for the clients that are customers, just because we're going to advertise the fact that you can come do it. And if I'm cleaning it and taking care of it and taking care of the garbage, it's part of my dining room, and my waitresses are going to be servicing those tables. Is that not again, that's where it's some of the
So what you're
logistics.
saying is you want us to assign tables to each of the
No,
restaurants?
it's just a matter that if I bring my tables out, I'm going to use them for short lines people, because the waitresses are going to be taking service there.
Okay, and so if somebody gets something, say,
That's my question.
first of all, this is waitress and waiter service. This isn't walk in the bar, even though they're talking about being able now to get a mixed drink to go. We're not really looking at that mixed drink to go thing. I agree with what you're saying, but if we're gonna all get real territorial about whose table is which, there are gonna be instances and times when somebody sits down at your table that probably didn't get their drink from you, or probably didn't get their sandwich from you. I just think if we're gonna make this work, we gotta be a little flexible
Well,
on that
I
thing.
don't mind being a little flexible, but if I have a waitress and she's working these tables and she's getting paid by tips by her tables, just like in the restaurant, her tables need to be available for her to do her.
Then I would suggest that you put your tables and figure out a way to establish your area.
Mr. Mayor, if I can intercede, because I'm not entirely concerned, I'm not sure you guys are talking from the same perspective, and it's also created doubt in my mind as to what I'm supposed to be drafting.
Okay.
My understanding is that we are simply, in the first instance, relaxing the sidewalk cafe ordinance, meaning Mr. Caldwell, or with his 3 restaurants, or any other restaurants in town, once they apply for the permit, it's granted, they can place a sidewalk cafe in front of their own establishment with their own tables, and to maintain those tables, and those tables are for their establishment only. It's
If
their
that's the
tables.
case, then why are we putting picnic tables down the middle of
And-
Buchanan Street?
And then my understanding, as a separate issue, is that the city was looking at putting some additional tables down the center of Buchanan Street, simply as a convenience for people in the public that perhaps went to a different locality that didn't have a sidewalk cafe and wanted to sit down and eat, or if they did a walk-in and carry-out kind of service for Mr. Caldwell, want to take it over there instead of sitting at his tables and be able to sit there and eat their food. And that's why I asked the question about the alcohol, because I didn't understand it to be that somebody could walk down to, I'm trying to think of a bar that's down the street. Well, Nico's is right on Buchanan Street. To Red's and pick up their bottle of beer or their Bloody Mary and walk all the way down to
Can't
Buchanan
walk
Street.
down the street.
It's
Red's
public
has a
consumption.
beer garden, believe it or not, if you go up there and look.
Yeah, it's questionable, but yeah.
Well, no, they built a brick wall and they have
Yeah, I know.
patio space. It's not,
So, but in short, the sidewalk cafe ordinance, as originally depicted, and as most communities now, in response to the governor's orders, are doing it, requires each establishment to have their own tables in front of their own establishment. Those are their tables, requires them to apply for a permit and to provide insurance, naming the municipality as an additional insured in case something happens to their patrons on the sidewalk.
Well, and maybe I'm
Okay,
just
okay.
misunderstanding of what's going on. And that's-
I have sample ordinances from the city of Springfield that I'm happy to give you a copy of it. You can look at what our sidewalk ordinance is, and if you want to try to match up to that as specifically as possible. Am I hearing that you don't want to have free open tables on Buchanan Street
I
that
guess I had
anybody
never
can
been-
use?
I had never thought that, because that has not what the stroll was either. Like to have the city, if the city wants to supply tables down the middle of the street, I don't have an issue with that. Then, you know, then
My
we get-
concern, not everybody who is going to have customers are going to be using this might be able to afford buying a picnic table
Well,
right now.
I
you
get
know,
that, but again,
so-
that's why I'm a misunderstanding of what the concept is. If we're trying to make Buchanan Street part of the city park system with picnic tables for everybody, I'm good with that. If we want to make a city cafe where I have waitresses waiting on tables, I'm good with that. I just got to know what direction you're going.
Okay, the idea was to
I have a
remove as
comment.
much of the expense for people to be able to accommodate all of the businesses to the best of each business's ability.
Alderman,
And their people, and so if you want to put signs on the tables that say, this table reserved for patrons of, that's fine too. So,
Oh.
yes, Alderman Frank.
I was just going to recommend, as soon as we can figure this out, putting something in the paper for the patrons to understand, you know, sort of like Sandy's asking, you know, how this all works, to clarify things, because this could be a really great thing to do.
Well, because we don't have, and we're still waiting for more guidance on this drink-to-go thing, which I think was a bad idea. But each establishment should seat people then at their designated tables and wait on them at those designated tables. I think we need to have a couple of overflow tables for people who maybe, you know, get a pizza someplace else and want to come sit down. It was kind of like what we talked about doing with this parking lot over here in the summer, you know, music and tables and so forth. But you're right, why doesn't each one of you look at what the state has in terms of the guidelines, look at our ordinance, make a copy for the city of what you're going to do to meet those guidelines. We'll consider all of those and how they line up with the sidewalk cafe ordinance, and we'll try to have an understanding to make it work for everybody.
just so you understand, Mr. Mayor, if that's the direction, there's no way I'll have this ready for council next Monday night.
Okay, what direction can you have ready?
I have a comment.
Yes, Alderman Freeman.
So I agree with what's trying to happen here. I think maybe like if each establishment maybe got a certain amount of territory and a certain amount of tables, and then they put their little signs up, like these tables are for firebox customers only, just like you would in a parking lot, parking for, you know, whatever the establishment is only. And then each one is responsible for cleaning up their area, and their waitress is responsible for waiting on those particular tables, because you don't want somebody from Nico's, you know, sitting down at the firebox and then getting up and going back to Nico's to get their drink, to go back and sit. Like, that's not, each one should have its own little territory, and these are their tables reserved for their establishment, and some might need more tables than others. The firebox might need a few more tables than the sushi shop, or vice versa, and that's up to the establishment owners to figure out how many tables they think they might need and to reserve those tables for whichever establishment that they're serving.
Well, that's kind of where we were 25 minutes ago before we
Well-
threw a monkey wrench in it.
And frankly, I completely misunderstood where we're going with it. This is Mike Drell again speaking. Because the only thing I can recommend, I mean, if the city wants to put some additional tables out there, the question then becomes who cleans them. But each establishment should have their own tables and their own sidewalk cafe in front of their own establishment. And the reason why I go that route is, number one, you don't have to worry about reserving tables or anything like that. They control their own tables. Number two, we've concentrated completely on the businesses surrounding or near to Buchanan Street. What about Lung Fung? What about McDonald's? Well, McDonald's got a big parking lot. But what about some of the establishments on North State Street that are nowhere near Buchanan Street, and we're not going to give them tables or space to put tables for their
Well, if we're going
restaurants?
to close a public thoroughfare, the idea was that we would make tables available for people. If we're going to, the other thing is we can leave Buchanan Street open, and you can put tables on the sidewalk in front of your restaurants. That's what a sidewalk cafe is about. The idea was to provide more seating, like we did during Stroll, that was open seating for people to come and sit and eat. Because if you're going to have two tables in your little space, or three tables in your little space in front of your business, and they fill up, and then there's no place for anybody overflow that comes to buy something from you, then that's that. I mean, the whole idea of temporarily closing and using the floor, the streetscape to provide more seating was that so everybody could get the maximum bang for their buck. So, you know, if that's if that's not what you had in mind, the city attorney doesn't think that's workable, I want to know what's workable that we can approve by council next week so we can get started.
At this particular point, we could start out at the sidewalk level and see how many people come. Everybody on Buchanan Street has some room on their sidewalks. It's one of the luxuries of being on Buchanan Street. It's got real great big sidewalks and bricked areas, so it doesn't even have to be on the sidewalk. If we start out it that way, and then by the next council meeting or how this goes, we'll know by Saturday how this goes. And if
Well,
it looks
you'll
like
know
we're-
by the Saturday after we start.
Well, yeah, well.
We're not
will we
starting
start this
tomorrow.
Friday?
No, it starts.
No, this ordinance can be passed until the earliest next Monday night. We already have sidewalk cafes in place,
Yeah.
yes.
So we
So if you have a permit,
Well, I will, if you guys can pass it, I'll get you a permit for $75 tomorrow. But if we can do that and start on the sidewalk, if it goes great, move it out into the street. If not, that's fine too, but then by then we'll at least have some of this logistics down. And if we're all dealing with the sidewalk cafe in front of our restaurants, and almost everybody has a little bit of room, then the city doesn't have to worry about dumpsters and moving tables. It's all our issue.
Okay, fine, done. And my concern about that is the traffic, because people are gonna be coming up and down Buchanan Street. Big delivery trucks gonna still pull down Buchanan Street. We'll try it your way, and we'll see how it works. I just think it limits the number of customers total that the business establishments will be able to entertain. And you're right, there is some sidewalk space in front of every business that's on Buchanan Street.
Well, at least that way we'll be able to get our feet wet and how to keep this cleanliness and how to keep the sanitation down pat. And then we can work our way into a bigger venue space, because if we've got this till October, you know, give us a few weeks to get our feet wet, and then just like the first Buchanan Street stroll did not look like the last one, we got a little more organized as we went down the road, we'll start out and get organized.
Okay?
Now, the question then would be, if we're going to go with that, we're still relaxing the area application, and we can have liquor on the street.
All right, couple of issues. I think Alderman Frank was about to ask a question, though.
I did. I just thought it would be a benefit to the people that have vendors like Sandy or Russell and El Mocajete if we could supply them with the garbage dumpsters and people be responsible for themselves. You know, he's got waitresses that are doing the meals and taking orders. The last thing they need to do is be cleaning up garbage.
Well,
that
that's
they
what
can.
they do anyway when they wait on
Yeah,
tables.
at this point, at this point, if we do it this way, Alderman, I think that the city's got enough to do right at the moment anyway.
So do you.
Well, I understand it, but we take care of tables, and we're not having to deal inside the store yet, so, and we have capacity for that, for today. We appreciate the help, and as this thing gets bigger, we're gonna need some help, and then we'll have the city jump in there.
So, Mr. Mayor, and the clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's actually two motions out there with 2 seconds. The first one was a motion to relax the rules, as I discussed, as well as to close Buchanan Street.
Well,
And the second one was,
A motion to waive the 2 weeks.
all right, and then really, we shouldn't have combined them that way. So what I would recommend, Your Honor, is to entertain a motion to relax the sidewalk cafe ordinance, including the alcohol portions thereof, as discussed previously with the city attorney to draft an ordinance for the remainder of this sidewalk cafe year. Obviously not make a motion to close Buchanan Street at this
okay,
point.
That's fine. That's
So
what
is
they
there,
think's gonna work the best.
would the movement of the, who's the movement on the original motion?
Frank and Stevens.
Does the movement and the second agree with that?
Yes.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
And next, Mr. Mayor, I believe there had been a motion to
Waive the,
waive the 2-week layover requirement, and I don't recall who made that motion or second.
Stevens.
Stevens made the
And then
motion.
Frank.
And Frank.
And then again, that can simply be voted on after discussion and moved to city council next week.
Any other questions or comments on the layover, waiving the layover? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is anyone opposed? So it's unanimous. Okay, so you are so instructed, Attorney Drella.
I'll do my darndest.
Next up under B, and I'll have Attorney Drella go through this and why we're doing this tonight too, is an appointment of Matthew Fleury for Ward 4 Alderman. It was tabled May 11th at a committee of the whole, and then it was tabled at a city council meeting.
So as you all know, and I kind of went through this in length last week, I believe it was, because the situation was actually tabled both at committee and council, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It actually will be on the agenda next Monday night at city council as a tabled item. At that point, the council could take it off the table, leave it on the table at city council. However, it's also on the table here at committee. And simply to clean up our procedure and make everything simple and easy to understand, my recommendation, Mr. Mayor, would be to remove it from the table this evening and either vote it up or vote it down, whichever way it goes, with the understanding they're not really approving the appointment yet. That cannot happen until next Monday night at the earliest. But what this does do is clean up our agendas.
Motion to remove the appointment of Matthew Fleury from the table. Motion by Alderman Frank. May I have a second, please?
I'll second that.
Second by Alderman Stevens. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Roll call vote. Well, there were opposition votes.
I think they were actually just delayed in voting. Was there any
Any
nays?
opposition votes? Okay, it's removed from the table unanimously then.
Correct. So any discussion, and then a roll call vote, or a voice vote after you're done with that.
So a motion to approve.
So we got a motion to approve.
So further discussion for the appointment.
I don't recall. Madam Clerk, was there actually an original motion? Or did Alderman Brereton move to table it before a motion was made?
I think you moved the table.
I believe Alderman Brereton actually made the motion to table before a motion to approve was made. So it'd be appropriate to entertain a motion to approve the appointment of Matt
Motion to
Fleury.
approve the appointment of Matthew Fleury to Ward 4 Alderman.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Revalo and Stevens.
And again, this is simply to move it out of committee. The final vote would occur when it comes off the table of council.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? Motion will be forwarded to council for final disposition. Okay, well, that was a fun exercise, folks. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Clayton Stevens, second by Wendy. Frank? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
We are now adjourned. Thank you, guys.